For the last decade, horror movies have become more and more complex due to them including some sort of social commentary. Of course, there were those few trailblazers that had something to say decades before, like Night of the Living Dead, They Live, Candyman, and The People Under the Stairs. If you haven't seen my video about People Under the Stairs, which discusses gentrification and capitalism, please check it out, because it's a good video. I swear. Whether Get Out can take the crown for kicking off this horror movie with a message renaissance within the last few years or not, now watching a horror film with little to no meaning seems to be becoming more and more rare. Due to horror films usually having a message now, they often get grouped into subcategories based on class, race, gender, and mental health issues. Because the hashtag MeToo movement gained international attention in 2017, and more horror films with a female lead became the popular choice, the subcategory of the MeToo thriller was bound to happen. Defined as a horror or thriller film that discusses themes of sexual abuse, sexual harassment, and rape culture. The MeToo thriller often shows the protagonist dealing with an abusive man, realizing her dire circumstances, and trying to stand up to those injustices. Sometimes they even show how the protagonist is dealing with the aftermath of that trauma. Films that keep being brought up when discussing this specific subgenre are Don't Worry Darling, Promising Young Woman, and of course now, Blink Twice. With Blink Twice, I can see why people would categorize this as a Me Too film. The protagonist Frida goes to a billionaire's island where initially she enjoys the exciting and luxurious lifestyle. After days of enjoying the 1,020 thread sheet counts, she soon realizes that something is off. When she notices that her friend/roommate suddenly vanished and no one seems to remember her, this is when Frida finally recognizes that something sinister is going on. Blink Twice touches on so many topics and themes like the rich abusing their power, manipulation and gaslighting, sexual assault, and female agency. Due to these themes feeling repetitive within the last few years, a lot of reviewers were harsh. In an article written by Vulture, one critic said, "But let's be honest, we've seen this film before." By that, I mean the Me Too social thriller, now a veritable 2020 subgenre, which also includes Emerald Fennell's 2020 rape revenge flick, Promising Young Woman, and Olivia Wilde's dark take on domesticity, 2022's Don't Worry Darling. And by now, we've heard what the genre has to say about feminism. It's a simple message. Rape culture hides in plain sight. Of course, any conscientious consumer of these movies already know that. So by simply reiterating the truth with no other insights, these films leave on the table many other complex and urgent emotional questions that face those of us who have experienced sexual trauma, not to mention our culture at large. In a similar article written by The Guardian, this critic said, Blink Twice partially gets there in that Frida and the other women do have to band together to get out alive. But though the film aims for serrated, vicious commentary, the life or death stakes, very bad men, women fight to survive, feel ironically low. We've seen this before, as with much of the Me Too discourse and art that seems more aimed at platitudes or subject matter accolades than curiosity, or even just specifics for female characters for the mechanics of the story. There's plenty of shock without surprise. Both reviewers criticize all three of these films I mentioned earlier, and specifically Blink Twice for having similar themes, which they do, but trying to dismiss their messages because of their similarities and not applauding them for their distinctive ways of touching on the same issues feels like a disservice to these films, and especially Blink Twice. Also, despite them having similar themes, for Promising Young Woman, I Spit on Your Grave, and Hard Candy, the majority of the film is us watching these women get revenge. When it comes to Don't Worry Darling, it's almost identical to The Stepford Wives. I mean, they literally copied and pasted certain themes, but they do have different tones. I think that due to certain themes in the film being more advertised compared to others, it makes it easy for viewers to miss out on the more nuanced concepts in the film. Themes that I thought were interesting and well done. Some of the other themes that Blink Twice touches on is class differences, performative change, therapy culture and how people weaponize therapy language, and shows just how powerful the subconscious is. To me, this film is more than just what they branded, a run-of-the-mill Me Too thriller / stereotypical feminist film. To me, it had so much to say. From the very first scene in the film, The idea of how complex the mind is was made very clear when it came to Frida, her motivations as a character, and how most of her decisions were subconscious. The reason why it took me so long to make this video was because initially I struggled to understand Frida's motivations throughout the entirety of the film. I feel like her motivations were constantly changing. Hell, as I'm saying this right now, I still go back and forth on how I feel. And that's after watching this movie literally 16 times. My conclusion is that I don't really know Frida's motivation throughout the film because I don't even think Frida as a character knows. What I mean is that what motivates her is unclear because she makes decisions off of her fainted memories and broken recollections from her subconscious mind. Like, for example, in the beginning, we see that she's incredibly infatuated, maybe even borderline obsessed with Slater. But the specific reason is never pinpointed because her motive feels all over the place. The creators and actors of the film reiterate that one of the main themes of the film is power. Slater has power and he abuses everything and everyone with it, including Frida, who then turns around and ends up with just as much power as him by the end. I get that theme. What I don't get is that if Frida's main desire and motivation throughout the entirety of the film was just to have power, then why wasn't that the driving force for her character until the very end? Because, like I stated earlier, I watched this film so many times, I've noticed how much thought went into every single detail, from the shots to the sound and even the color scheme. That's why I believe Frida was driven by subconscious things that happened to her on that island, and that was her driving motivator throughout the entire film. To explain what I mean, let's just go back to the beginning. When we're first introduced to Slater, we watch along with Frida a video of him apologizing for his abusive behavior. She quickly looks up his allegations, and this is when we learn that he, not shockingly as a billionaire, abuses his power. Despite Frida knowing about his past indiscretions, when she sees him at the event, she can't help but stare at him through the door as he gives his speech. When Jess tells her that she's going to sprain her neck from staring at him, she says,
"I don't care if I break it."
Later into the event, when she surprises Jess with dresses, Jess brings up how they could lose their jobs, but once again, Frida responds with,
Just don't do that.
If Frida's sole intention was just to see how the other half lives, I would understand why she ditched work for the rest of the night. But not once during the majority of the film did I get the impression that Frida was so desperate to become rich and live in luxury until the very end when she decided to save Slater. If Frida's main motivation for the entirety of the film was to not only enjoy Slater's wealth but also benefit from it like she did at the end, then showing her financial aspirations from the beginning would have made her goal evident. In her opening scene, we see how she's short on her half of the rent and how she has to take the bus to work. But other than that, there wasn't any moment that showed us how heavy of a burden her financial situation felt. She never huffed and puffed about being broke or hating her job. Her and Jess never had a moment where they talked about their financial goals or career dreams. None of this. What's funny is that we actually know Jess's desire, which is to be an actress because she mentions an audition, but with Frida, we never really truly know. I mean, at the beginning, they could have shown Frida looking online at a retail space for rent, maybe in the hopes of buying it one day so she can open up her own nail salon. They could have shown us something, anything actually, but they didn't. One film critic from the New York Times even briefly wrote about the lack of backstory and understanding of Frida. They said, Blink Twice is haunted by lost opportunities. As a woman and survivor, Frida feels ignored, but Kravitz leaves the erasure that Black women feel untapped. She renders Frida similarly invisible, using a twist to erase any backstory about her. Because we barely get any backstory as to who Frida is, when it comes to determining her motivations as a character, it's almost impossible to define. What we know about her life is that her mother tried to unalive herself in front of Frida and that she doesn't believe in therapy. That's it. If Frida's backstory would have been explored, we could have been able to determine why she doesn't feel seen or why she would want to go to such extremes to be rich. In an interview with CG Movies, Zoe Kravitz did say this about the character Frida. I think making Frida so lost in life and not being sure about what she wanted when going to that island or life in general really made understanding her as a character almost impossible. When it comes to the protagonist in any story, we should always know their internal and external motivations. With Cassandra, her goal was to get revenge on the people that assaulted her best friend Nina. And don't worry, darling, a quarter into the film, Alice's goal became trying to figure out why strange things kept happening to and around her. With Frida, for the first half of the movie, I was left wondering if she was just there for a fun vacation, or was she there to try and permanently be with Slater, or was she trying to get money out of him, or maybe she actually genuinely liked him. Maybe even she was just trying to literally be him. Honestly, I don't know. During the second half of the film, once Jess goes missing, this is when she finally has a clear motivation to figure out what happened to her friend. Frida's goal for the first half of the film was never made clear, which made understanding the entire story a lot harder. Now, don't get me wrong, there were moments where Frida's motivation seemed to be about being with Slater, and maybe even literally being him, but these moments feel so inconsequential. Like, for example, numerous times Frida tried to assimilate herself into his life. During the dinner scene, when Slater says that he doesn't eat red meat, so she puts her steak back, or when she clearly didn't like how his vape tasted, but later when she's alone, she smokes it again. These moments show that she is trying to fit into his life and maybe even trying to be him, but at least for me, these moments don't feel desperate enough, especially when you compare it to her decision to stay with her abuser at the end. If she wanted to be a hashtag boss babe, and I say that ironically, of course, because Frida is no feminist. Just saying. A scene where she asked him about his company, stock tips, hell, even a job would have shown that being like him or building some sort of career success was her leading motivation. The only moment where we saw an ounce of desperation to stay on that island happened after Jess got bit and wanted to go home. A real friend would have been ready to go, but instead, Frida decided to go on a rant about the food and the champagne. This scene could have worked to support the idea that Frida is desperate to stay so she can continue to live in that lifestyle with Slater forever, but one single line undermined this entire idea when she says,
For the first time in my life, I'm here, and I'm not invisible, so please.
This one line changed what I initially thought her true motivation was, money, and turned her goal into something completely different. What's so confusing is that Frida as a character says this, but once again, moments throughout the film barely back up this claim. She could feel this way because she is a waiter and guests often look right through her. But we never saw a moment where she gets ignored to reiterate this idea. She says she feels invisible, but time and time again just listens to what she has to say and very clearly cares about her opinion. If the story really wanted to stress this idea of Frida being desperate to be seen, a perfect moment could have been during the pool scene when Sarah was receiving attention from Slater. Frida starts choking on a raspberry, which causes Slater to bring his attention back to her. Because they left this up for interpretation and we never got to know if Frida did this on purpose or was she actually choking, it's hard to determine if Frida was just so desperate for his never-ending attention. If her main motivation was to feel seen, then this film should have given us quick moments of her being ignored and forgotten. But it didn't. Because the idea of either Frida wanting his attention or wanting his lifestyle was never solidified, her motivations were never entirely cohesive. Which brings me back to this idea of Frida's actions being solely motivated by her subconscious past with Slater. At the beginning, when Frida sees him at the event, while she's talking to Jess, mid-conversation she turns towards Slater and starts approaching him like she's physically being pulled in, sort of like she's in a trance. This sort of gravitational connection reminds me of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, because no matter how many times your memory is wiped, subconsciously you can still gravitate towards the same person, like Joel and Clementine or Howard and Mary. Joel, Clementine, and Mary got their relationship memories completely wiped, but by the end, they still gravitated towards said person because of their subconscious memories. The events that took place during her first time on the island also subconsciously influenced Frida's personal life as well. When we're first introduced to her, we see her posting photos of her nails on Instagram trying to build up her clientele. She doesn't have many followers or posts, which I think is due to her being early in her career, and this idea is confirmed when Vic questions her later at dinner about what she does for a living. She responds with,
I'm just trying to figure it out.
which feels like she might have been in a similar place when she met them the first time. Frida's still working as a cocktail waitress and she's still unsure about what she wants to do. On the surface, you would assume that she's just passionate about being a nail designer, but I think her decision to pursue this career is because of Slater. Earlier in the film, when Frida is talking to her boss, she brings up how at last year's event, Slater complimented her on her nails. Of course, we know that Slater did do this the year before, but he actually complimented her while she was on the island the first time. In the scene where she's running away from him, but he catches her, drops her on a rock, and then ties her up, this is the moment where he compliments her nails.
I like your nails.
Not at the event. Frida received a compliment during an extremely traumatic moment, but due to the perfume, she misremembers everything. Even though Frida already did animals before she met Slater, I wouldn't be surprised if his compliment was a key factor in her starting her business. This idea that Frida's personal life is subconsciously influenced by what happened to her on that island shows up again during the opening scene too. When the film opens up, we see a lizard sitting on a rock in the middle of the forest. The film then cuts to Frida in the bathroom posting a picture on her Instagram with the same lizard on her nail, color and all. Subconsciously, she remembers the lizard because this was the only thing in her view when she hit her head. But in her conscious mind, she just thought painting a green lizard would be a cute design. This quick detail showed that even though Frida's memories were completely wiped, most of the events that happened on that island are still there subconsciously. A year later, she's still making decisions based off what happened on that island, and she doesn't even know it. One of my favorite themes in Blink Twice was the focus on the class differences between Slater and his local staff on the island. Despite frequently appearing in the background for numerous scenes, Slater's staff continuously played a huge part in the film, not only visually but also plot-wise. For the majority of the film, the local staff was only meant to be seen and not heard, and that's exactly what happened. Throughout the entire film, the only staff member who spoke a single word was a character named Badass Maid. I'm not even joking, she is literally credited as that, and I think her not having an actual name was 100% intentional. Erasing her name is like erasing her and the other staff members' individuality and highlights how someone of Slater's status looks at his staff, not as individuals and people, but as an unimportant group who takes care of his villa. The only person who asked the maid what her name was is Frida, who is also working class too. Because her and Frida have that relatability, she shows the maid decency and respect as a human being, especially when you compare her to Slater, who's constantly around his staff but never acknowledges them. The most compelling idea when it relates to the theme of class was how every staff member was not only aware of Slater's actions, but they continuously participated in it because they had little choice. Their job is their entire livelihood. When Frida first encounters the maid, we see her leave a bucket nearby, ready to clean Frida up later into the night. The only reason that I think that bucket was there to clean up Frida was because, well, who else was cleaning them up? During the pool scene, we see that the bottom of their feet is dirty, but the rest of their body is not. And when the reveal scene came up and Slater is talking to his therapist, he says,
We'll get her cleaned up and she'll be back to having the time of her life.
So that's why I think that bucket is there specifically to clean Frida. When it comes to the groundskeepers, they were constantly hunting for snakes to ensure none of the women get bit because then they would remember everything. And the staff even changed Jess's room into a storage room overnight to make it seem like she was never there. Time and time again, the staff did things to assist Slater in his evil actions, but as I stated earlier, they had very little choice. Being shot in Mexico and specifically Yucatan, I'm just going to assume that the film takes place on an imaginary island in Mexico. Because this specific region's economy makes the majority of their money from tourism and agriculture, oftentimes jobs can be seasonal, which in turn makes it hard to keep the same consistent job. Because I'm sure the staff is dependent on keeping their jobs, and they lack the same amount of power compared to a billionaire like Slater, this imbalanced dynamic makes it almost impossible for them to stand up to or defend the women who come to the island. Even if they did decide to go to authorities about what's happening, who would believe them or care enough to persecute a billionaire who brought millions and millions of dollars to their country? Not only would the staff lose their income and maybe even their life, but they also likely struggle to convince people that a billionaire is using a memory-erasing perfume on unsuspecting women. Frida and Sarah have this exact same conversation in the film, which goes to show just how limiting the staff members' options are. During their first encounter in the room, the maid's demeanor quickly shifts from excitement to seriousness when she realizes that Frida has no idea what red rabbit means and that they've already met before. She realizes that Slater has used the flower to erase Frida's memory, so at that moment she decides to go out and do something about it. In very quick shots, we see her hunt for snakes, drain their venom into a bottle, and then hand the bottle over to Frida. All of these actions, to me, suggest that she's genuinely trying to help the women. Why else would she be the one hunting for snakes on the property when there are plenty of other workers who can do it? And why would she be collecting venom in a bottle if it wasn't meant for someone to drink? Even in the scene when she's holding up a snake after unaliving it, she smiles at Frida like, "Girl, I got this for you." When she hands her the bottle, she shushes Frida, basically telling her, "This is between me and you. Please don't tell my boss." I truly think that if the maid could have outwardly helped the women, she would have. But due to her being confined by her financial circumstances and the lack of power she has no choice but to find creative ways to help them out. Luckily, she got what she wanted at the end, though. Her laugh says it all. When it comes to the other staff members, they seem to be well aware of Slater's actions too. When the women first arrive on the island, two male landscapers stare at them and just smile when they ask for directions. On one hand, this scene could have just been included to be creepy, but I'm assuming everything is intentional. Their reaction to Frida and Jess makes me think that they're well aware of what happens to them at night and take enjoyment in knowing this. On the other hand, maybe they were just smiling to be friendly, but the sinister music in the scene tells me otherwise. With this scene, I do want to add though that I think this was a missed opportunity to showcase that not all men are condoning rapists. Instead of the gardeners creepily smiling at Frida and Jess, alternatively, they could have tried to avoid their gaze or gave them a sympathetic smile. Adjusting this moment even a tiny bit could have further highlighted this theme of class and being restricted by their financial circumstances. From the very first moment that we're introduced to Slater, therapy is a leading topic in most of his conversations. Due to recent workplace abuse allegations, Slater stepped down as CEO, gave the largest philanthropic donation, started a foundation, and continuously attended therapy to show that he has quote-unquote changed. When Frida initially meets him at the charity event, one of the people she's introduced to is his therapist, Rich. From this moment on, most of his and Frida's more intimate conversations revolve around how therapy has changed him and how he's in a healthier place now. Of course, we know this is somewhat a facade. I do think he truly believes that forgetting the traumatic moments from his childhood has really changed him for the better, but at his core, he's still a vile human being. One thing that stood out to me was how Slater's every word and action towards Frida was deliberate and darkly calculated. And when I say every word and action, I mean every word and action. In the beginning, when he introduces her to all of his friends at the event, he's only doing this to test her memory to see if she remembers them. In the same scene when she states that she has an excellent memory to Rich, he laughs at Frida directly in her face because, well, she doesn't remember.
What?
Nothing.
When he rushes back in to invite Frida to the island for the second time, I think this decision is last minute because he wants to test the power of his perfume. If she completely forgot about the island the first time, let's see if she'll forget about everything again. Even when he's constantly asking her if she's having a good time,
You having a good time? Are you having a good time? Are you having a good time?
he's only using this question to gauge what she does and doesn't remember. He could care less if she's actually having a good time. Whenever she responds in the way that he wants, like when he asked her how she got that scar, and she responds with,
I don't know.
he smirks in enjoyment because his idea of therapy works. All trauma is erased. He does this again the next morning when he asks her how she slept after witnessing Jess's death, and she responds with,
Amazing.
he's constantly watching and questioning her like she's a test subject and he's the scientist. Slater is such an interesting villain because you can tell that he truly believes that his perfume is a gift. When he gives his villain speech at the end of the film, he relishes in the fact that his own traumatic childhood memories are completely forgotten. In his mind, Frida forgetting about her scar, the unaliving of her friend, and everything that happened to her on that island is a gift she should be appreciative for. Another thing I noticed about Slater was how he weaponized therapy by using therapeutic language as a sort of tool to make the women more comfortable and susceptible to his actions. Like when everyone first arrived on the island and Jess was apprehensive about handing over her phone, he says,
You don't have to do anything that you don't want to do.
which is now a popular phrase used often when we talk about consent. Slater does this again when Frida asks him when are they supposed to leave, and he responds with,
Whenever you want.
he's constantly giving them the impression that they have full autonomy while on the island when they actually don't. Whenever a female character would feel uncomfortable or question something that is weird, he would verbally validate their right to choose while also doing the complete opposite with his action. Because he often used statements like,
Therapy changed my life.
or
I got therapy in the morning.
these statements become a tool to make women feel more comfortable, which eventually makes them more vulnerable to his actions. I think Blink Twice is such an amazing film because I can tell how much love and care Zoe Kravitz put into making it. With every shot, every song choice, and every outfit, I can tell these details have a specific purpose. She truly cared about making a great film. One of the elements I really enjoyed that I hadn't discussed yet was how she decided to use sound to focus on certain themes and moments. Like when Frida drinks the venom, the first memory that comes back to her is the sound of what happened that night, not the visual memory, which I think is a nice touch. When it comes to the other pronounced sounds like Jess's lighter and Slater's vape, Jess's lighter is the one item that reminded Frida of her friend and made Sarah believe that someone named Jess was actually on the island. The lighter is precisely the catalyst for bringing them together and taking Slater down. Lastly, hearing Slater's vape throughout the film was also a nice added touch because it underlined an integral part of the story. The one thing he couldn't live without eventually became his downfall. One of the last details I wanted to discuss was the revelation that the bows on the dresses weren't just decorative. They were intentionally designed to solely restrain the women. This is an amazing detail, but it's some dark shit. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. It would mean so much to me. Bye!